Welcome to Native Exiles, Alderwood Community Church's podcast, where we talk about following Jesus in the tension of being in the world but not of it. And excited for our conversation today. We have a special guest, Tim Gaydos, who was a pastor here at Alderwood some time ago. Actually, when I was here as a student, he was a pastor and went on from Alderwood to be a campus pastor at Mars Hill Church in Seattle, which at that point was just a fast-growing, exciting church. And Tim was there for a number of years and ended up leaving just shortly before Mars Hill shut down. And we have a great conversation. Tim is connected with many church leaders today, and we're talking about church leadership, why we see so many pastors fail, it seems like, and are we even in a crisis right now of church leadership? Is something wrong with the American evangelical church that is causing the problems we're seeing? And I know it was helpful for me. I think it'll be encouraging to you. Here we go. Tim, welcome to Native Exiles. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, good to be here.
So for people who don't know your story, I'd love to just start off. Tell us a little bit about your journey in ministry and how you ended up where you are now.
Absolutely, yeah. Grew up here. Just incredible memories of Alderwood Church, Alderwood Manor Community Church.
That's right. That's right.
Old school. Growing up here, came back here after I graduated from seminary down in California, and Pastor Brad, who you know, he reached out and said, "Hey, would you consider being the student ministries pastor?" And came back up to the home, and at the same time, we had been going to Mars Hill Church in the evening. Mars Hill was, when we started, the values were meaning, beauty, truth, community. Like those were the four values. It quickly changed, and maybe we'll somehow transition to maybe what you want to talk about in terms of some of the leadership stuff today. But it changed to, more of a focus on let's become a big church, and let's grow this sucker. Yeah. Let's get after it. Look what we're doing. Look how fast we're growing. Let's keep this thing going, and let's see. From the high levels of leadership there, it really turned and changed into let's how can we pour some more gasoline on this fire? Yeah. And keep this going. And so with that, a lot of things changed in terms of what leadership looked like, how people were treated, how we approach things, what our philosophy is. So there's a lot that kind of came underneath that banner of, and honestly, I mean, I'd liken it to Genesis and the Tower of Babel. So that, let's build a skyscraper to God. Yeah. Yeah. Reach the heavens. Yeah. And so you guys made the decision to move on, and you went and planted a Seattle church after that. And that was, how long did you leave Mars Hill before Mars Hill ended up shutting down? We left March of 2013, and then Mars Hill shut down, I think, December of 2014? Okay, so year and a half. Yeah. And maybe, we can kind of get to present day here. You plant a Seattle church, and which is still going strong, and but you have moved on from church pastoral ministry, still doing ministry today in a new context. Tell people what you're up to right now. Yeah, a few different things that my wife is like, can you just pick one? Just pick one. Yep. But I have a problem, My primary work when I transitioned from a Seattle church, we had been doing a lot of civic ministry, and I think you and I briefly talked about this. Is that the belief that we're called to a time and to a place, and that what does it look like to be in the community that you're in, and so out of that work at a Seattle church, essentially Together Washington started, which is, it's a nonprofit organization seeking to build bridges across divides. Yeah. It started in Seattle. It's now statewide. We're working in cities across the state.
And so you're building relationships between church leaders and civic leaders and business leaders and that. Mm-hmm. And what's the desired result out of that as you connect these leaders together? What are you trying to build?
Yeah, I mean, I would say at the high level, and this is my motivator. The high level is that people of faith should be leading the way in being peacemakers and bringing people together and reconciling relationships. It really the values and the kind of the philosophy behind it was that we're in an incredibly divided society right now. I mean, just obviously, I mean, more so than any of us have ever seen. And talk of civil war and those kind of things, I don't think that's hyperbolic either. I mean, I think we're entering into some really interesting times. What does it look like, as people of faith, to bring people together and say, hey, we may not agree. I'm not necessarily looking for you to change your convictions and values about what it is you believe, but we still should be in relationship together. Yeah. At the heart of it, you preached on this a couple of weeks ago around the Imago Dei, right? Mm-hmm. The image of God calls us, all of us are created in the image of God and have that value, right? And therefore, even though I disagree with where you're coming from, we should still be in human relationship with one another and try to understand one another into a level. So we try to take that concept into a city and work with government, business, faith, nonprofit leaders to help the challenges that community might be facing.
That's awesome. Yeah. So through your work as a pastor in Seattle, with Together Washington, you're pretty well connected with church leaders. You rub shoulders with pastors all the time. I mean, where I really wanted to talk today is just around where we're at as church leaders right now. I think you mentioned the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill podcast came out last year. Many people have been listening to that. Just wrapped up this last week. And not just that, there's a Discovery Plus series on Hillsong Church and some of the scandals and people falling from grace there. I think people feel like we're in a moment right now where there's a crisis of church leadership, where something is fundamentally broken about the church, about what it means to be a pastor. Feels like just every month you hear some story of a pastor who everybody thought was great, who is now, in the middle of some scandal. And, knowing how well connected you are in that world, I'd love to hear your perspective. I mean, my first question is honestly, is it true? It feels like we're in a crisis of church leadership. Do you think we are in a unique moment where more pastors are failing than they ever have, where there's something super broken about our experience of the church, or is it something else? Is there just more media coverage now than there used to be, or something like that? I mean, when you think about where we are, what goes through your mind?
The short answer is I don't know. It's impossible to discern that, right? Yeah. In terms of in the context of, let's just even say the last 200 years, right? Yeah. I mean, how would you even compare that? I think it'd be very difficult to compare. However, because of, how we learn about information and news today, we're finding out about things that we would probably never find out about 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. we would just never find out. I mean, you think of like the Catholic Church scandal, right? That's happened, right? I mean, and how long some of those things just stayed buried. Right.
Yeah. It seems like there might be more than one thing going on.
Right.
We're in a series right now as a church where we're looking at, we're going through the Bible this year, and, we're getting to the beginning of the kingdom of Israel. It'll be in 1st and 2nd Samuel, looking at Saul and David and Solomon. And I mean, one of the things that's just glaring in those Bible stories is, man, leaders have failed for a long, long time. It did not start in the last, 50 years in America. Right. Even the heroes that we look up to in the faith, the Davids of the world, David obviously has the scandal of his own with Bathsheba, with committing murder to cover it up, and all of that. So it seems like failure in the church, failure of leaders, is a long time problem. From your perspective, though, is there something unique? I mean, you talked about at Mars that desire to build something big. Do you think that is uniquely tied to some of the struggles we're seeing with Christian leaders right now?
Yeah, I mean, when I look at what the context we're in, that's all we can really dissect or parse, right? Is what we can go back, and I don't know how many historical books there are on, church leaders in other, generations, right? But we know today and what we're seeing today. And yeah, I mean, I think there is something in the water that is toxic, that we've been swimming in. It's like a fish in water. Like you just kind of like, hey, it's just, what is water?
Yeah.
And I think that there is some things that the way that we've grown up in the evangelical church, that there is some toxic water that we've been swimming in. That has led to, I think, some of these things that we're seeing and reading about. And I'm sure we could probably list out a whole section of things that we've read about from leaders recently. And I think there's a lot of concerning things.
So I mean, what would you put your finger on? What makes up the toxic water in your minds? Like what are the ingredients of the evangelical church today that's not helping us?
Yeah. I mean, I think, first off, and I'll just limit it to America, because that's, in terms of, I mean, obviously there's an evangelical church in Europe and whatnot, but and I think there's a handful of things, but I'll just start off by saying, we love this motto of we do things, right? We get things done. We are bigger, better, faster, stronger. I mean, that's an American theme, right? And so it's interesting. How do you shift from, America has these kind of values of that, right? We're going to get it done, right? And we're the best, and we're going to grow this thing, and we translate that into the church, right? We translate those American values into the church as well, into American leadership, right? I mean, think of like the leadership boom over the last 30, 40 years, right? I mean, my goodness. I mean, you go to a bookstore, and that may be the largest section you find, right? Is all the leadership books, right? And that translates to the American church as well, right? How to be a leader in the church, and taking a lot of the principles from the kind of the, if you want to call it, the business world. But there's a huge disconnect between how we look at the church and church leadership and what it looks like in the context of Scripture. I mean, there is such a disconnect that it's pretty mind blowing when you actually get down on the ground level of it. I mean, for instance, and this is not a surprise to you in terms of what you go to a church conference, pastor's conference, and hey, how you doing? And hey, how's the church going, right? And of course, what's the first thing that goes through every single pastor's mind is, okay, when I'm asked how the church is going, or when I ask someone else how the church is going, it's like, well, yeah, I guess it's going good, because it's,
growing.
We're growing, or
that's how you know.
I mean, it is. We take things and translate them into our outcomes, into our metrics that you won't find in Scripture. Yeah. Right. And I mean, how often do you hear John 15:8 when it comes to how the church is going? Which is, Jesus talks about the whole purpose, that while I'm here and to be in relationship with me is to bear much fruit. That is it, to bear fruit.
Well, and what is that fruit? I mean, because I think the bearing fruit, again, like it's easier for people to think it means you're growing. Like that's the fruit of the church, is more people, but that's not what Jesus has in mind. I mean, it's the fruit of the Spirit. It's the fruit of relationship with Him and seeing the Spirit transform lives. And Yeah, I mean, that does exist for sure in our culture here. Yeah, I mean, the challenge of that too is, I think you pair that mindset with what you were talking about earlier about just the divisive nature of the world we're in right now. And I wonder if part of what goes on is if you have like super, super clear good guys and bad guys in your mind, whether it's politics, church, whatever, if, you know, your church succeeding, more people coming to your church who believe what you believe, if that is the ultimate good of life, is that your team is doing better than the people who think differently than you, whether they're other Christians, other denominations, or people who aren't Christians, I think there's almost this sense of you are willing to overlook the flaws of people in your team because you only care about your team winning and the other team, you know, looking bad. And so when you see something concerning in a leader in your own circle, it's, I think, much easier to kind of look the other way. We're certainly seeing that in politics right now. I wonder if that's been happening in the church as well. Sure. Where we're not holding people to accountability in the same way that we should as followers of Jesus. You know, that our expectation of a church leader should be character more than leadership gifting, you know, more than how good of a communicator you are. Like those things are important, but character has to be the first. And I don't think we've seen the church willing to hold that standard to their leaders when things are good, when people are coming, when the church is growing, when people are giving, you know, you don't want to give that up. Yeah.
No, I mean, if you talk to someone and someone's trying to say, hey, you should come to my church or come here, it's genuinely because of like, hey, you know, we like to say, hey, this person's gifted, or hey, you know, they're a good speaker, or hey, the music's good, you know, or what have you. This should be a telltale sign to us, right? In terms of what we've been conditioned to look at, in terms of the community that God has called to come together and is designed. Right? Yeah. I mean, how often in a job description have you seen, you know, the fruits of the Spirit, right? In how they go through it, right? And the whole process of a pastoral search. Do we look at the fruits of the Spirit, or do we look at, you know, you go back and, well, I don't know if I should necessarily say too much about some themes that I've seen over the years, but I'll say this, that in a lot of leaders who have really fallen, there's some constant themes.
What have you seen there?
Well, I started picking up on it a number of years ago. And certainly character is, and you mentioned that, is obviously a consistent theme. But I think if we go to the break, now this, I don't know how much time we have, Wyatt. Do we have 5 hours?
We have a little less than 5 hours. Yeah. But I want to hear, what are the themes that you've seen that have been patterns that repeat themselves when people are falling from ministry?
I think there's a lot of interwoven things that when we look at healthy leaders, pastors, where we're at as an American church, there's a lot of kind of interwoven things that are happening. One, I think, you know, it's interesting. We love, let me back up a little more. We love celebrities in the American church, right? My goodness, they're one of ours, right? Billy Graham is kind of like our patron saint of celebrities, right? And we look at that, right? And if someone becomes a Christian, right? We're like Darryl Strawberry, if you remember back you're way too young for that.
Well, more recently, I mean, you know, in our area, the fact that Russell Wilson was at Church Home was a huge deal. Like, people loved that, you know, and my cousin, you know, went there and he's like, I sat behind DK Metcalf this Sunday. You know, It's like it's the best thing ever, you know, and and it's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but
there isn't anything wrong with that. But I think people need to stop and actually ask themselves, why is it that we get so enthused about those kind of things? Yeah. We are enamored with those kind of, you know, whatever it is. And we want to be we want to be people of influence. We want to make a difference. But we don't talk a lot about identity. Mm-hmm. It's all what we see in the Christian church is more about what we do, not who we are. And I know you talk about identity, and it's very basic, right? Your identity's in Christ, and yeah. But the significance of that is so huge, because what I see is a lot of people who don't have their identity in Christ, right? In the sense of Christian leaders, because they have something to prove. Yeah, they want to grow this thing. They want to be accepted. They have a need. They have a desire that is insatiable inside of them to make this thing go.
Yeah. Well, and if your metric for success is growth numerically, then having some people with influence in your congregation is helpful. Having some people who are well-known, famous, whatever, like, it's a very cool thing, because other people are going to be drawn to that. And so, it's intoxicating. It's kind of like, this is going to be one of those things that helps us, continue to see more and more people come in our doors and to grow. So if you're on that mindset that you talked about earlier, that's what success is. And it makes perfect sense that we would love celebrities. We would love any kind of influence, any kind of cultural cachet we can get, we'll take it, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I've seen now, this confluence where we talk about identity, but we really, when it comes to actually resting in who I am, and resting in the work of Christ, and resting in who God has made me to be. But we have such a desire to become somebody, right? Yeah. I mean, I was just looking at a friend of mine was like, "Hey, have you heard of this one church up in this area which is quote unquote growing," right? Mm-hmm. And I went on the website, and the bio of the pastor says, "I always knew God had something special for me," right? And right there, I mean, that is the biggest red flag that I can see, right? Because it's, again, we make it about us. It's about me. It's about my ministry, right? And it's not about my ministry, right? It's about the community that God has called us to be in. And
part of it's that mindset of leaders of, I'm unique, I'm special, God's going to do something special with me, and I want to be the one that God does that through. That can be dangerous. There's also a flip side of, I think, for those of us in the pews, there's an interesting desire to be a part of a church or of a ministry led by a unique person. There's that kind of American desire for the brilliant leader who is going to change things, and we're going to follow it. I mean, it's in business with the love of people like Steve Jobs. It's in ministry with the celebrity pastors, and I've been interested too. Like I said, preparing for this series. I mean, it's how the story of these kings of Israel start. God says, "I want to be your king. I want to be." You're going to be my people. You're going to be my nation. I have a unique relationship with you. And it's the people who go, "No, we want a king. Like we want a powerful person who can solve problems and defend us from enemies and lead us." And God says, "I don't think you do. He's going to tax you. He's going to take your children as his servants. He's going to take the best land. On and on and on." God says, "You don't want this." And the people go, "No, we do. Give it to us." Mm-hmm. And I see some parallels to where we are in the church with that right now. We, the church, we are God's people. We have the Spirit in us. God desires a personal relationship with us through Jesus, and yet there is still this temptation that, okay, that's all well and good, but I also want to be at the church with the best preaching, the best band, I want to go to the show too. Right. And I think that's something we need to wrestle with.
Yeah, the old famous phrase, "I want to be part of something bigger than myself," right? I mean, that's something that many people say and we use, but we are part of something bigger than ourselves, right? I mean, if you truly understand.
Yeah, we're part of the body of Christ, and it's in that community that I think we're meant to find that calling. I mean, I wonder if that's one of the other ingredients that's in existence right now in the American evangelical church is, it seems like when people think about church, there's been a shift away from the church is the community of believers. It's my, brothers and sisters in my living room, sharing a meal together, holding each other accountable, praying for one another, encouraging each other, studying the Bible together. Like, that's the church. It seems like there's been maybe a little bit of a shift from our thinking to, no, the church is the Sunday morning service. It's us in the chairs all facing the stage with one person who has the answers or is going to teach us the word. And that's what I do for a living. I'm a fan of it. I think it's important. It's an important aspect of the church that we learn together, that we grow as, sure. And that there's teachers and that there's worship in corporate settings. I'm all for it. But man, I think the church is, as much as it is that, it is the relationships you have with the people. It's the family of God. And as we've shifted away from that, I think it's given more power, more influence to whoever it is on stage. Because if you put all your emphasis on that Sunday morning gathering, then yeah, like whoever the best preacher is, whoever the best band is, like they're going to be the ones that everyone wants to go to.
Right.
And I'm not sure that's gotten us where we want to go.
Yeah, no. And then we emphasize those things, right? I mean, that becomes the emphasis. The pastoral search committee ends up, okay, how do we do this and this and this? And, interesting, I was going to mention the common thread. So I mentioned the Billy Graham phenomenon, right? Where, and obviously, thank you, Lord, that, he, didn't have, 10 other wives or anything like that, right? Mm-hmm. We're thankful that that was the case. But we also forget, two of his grandsons went to a Seattle church. Wow. And so got a unique view at, some other family life, right? Type of dynamics. And when someone's gone that much, right? That's one part we don't talk about, right?
Yeah.
And and the thing that's interesting is that I think the breakdown of the family that we see in our culture is so significant that I don't think we fully can wrap our minds around the breakdown of the family and how that plays itself out in our current context. I would say, and I'm not exaggerating, but of the 10 people I know who have had some significant kind of moral failures pastorally, there was one constant theme, and that was a significant father wound. Significant. And so there was in all of them, they had this insatiable desire that they didn't get, that they needed to become somebody, right? And they'll do anything in their power. And obviously, unfortunately, they did it in the context of the church, right? Which is unbelievably damaging to so many. But they had that desire that they needed to become somebody, right? Their identity wasn't really set. Now God does, as we all know, I mean, he does these transformational works. It doesn't matter if we come from a dysfunctional home or if we had a mom or dad or whatever it is. God, through the Spirit, is going to do some amazing works. Yeah. But it's pretty phenomenal to know that 10 out of 10, there was a significant father wound. Yeah. What does that tell us about where we're at as a society and the importance of family, the importance of, staying together? Yeah. Anyways, there's a lot there.
We got to wrap things up here, but I'd love to just close and ask, what would you say right now to pastors, to people in churches? Like, we're going to see a healthier dynamic with leaders, with even when things are good, with our relationship with pastors in the church, but also in preventing some of these scandals. I mean, what are some things that you think would be worth us pursuing to see a healthier future moving forward than we've had in the recent past?
We don't do mentorship. I mean, that rarely exists, like really mentorship. I mean, there should be a sense of how the older generation, we see that in Scripture, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, very intentional, right? Paul and Timothy, and we could go on and on about the mentoring relationships that are there. We don't see that a lot today. Again, I think a lot of it goes back to that individualized society, or it's my ministry. But if we could have, if the older generation could pour into, I mean, really see that as they have developed wisdom and maturity over the years to pour into young people. I mean, that is absolutely, I think, super significant in our day and age. I mean, certainly, the development of character, humility. Humility is just, not something that is talked about much. I mean, it's just kind of if it is, it's kind of a bumper sticker type of phrase.
Yeah.
But what does living a life of a faithful presence look like?
Yeah.
Each person has been called, again, access to a time and place, and to be a faithful presence in that particular time and place.
Yeah.
And even when things are maybe not going the way you want them to go, and you wish you would see more fruit or what have you, I think we again have a culture that it's like, I'm ready to just kind of move on. I'm ready to just, hey, it's not happening. There's nothing that when I see someone, the people who have been most impactful in my life aren't the people who have written the books. And if they have, they're the ones that they said, I'll write my first book when I'm 60.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And after a lifetime of, just learning and understanding, doing things quietly.
Yeah.
I mean, those are the people who have impacted me the most, who are behind the scenes, the faithful presence, who have learned what contentment looks like, and that it's not about them.
Yeah. No, that's helpful. Yeah. Man, when I think about what needs to change for leaders, and I mean, I'm a little self-interested in thinking through this problem. I just became a lead pastor a year ago. I'm hoping to do this for a long time, and I want to be faithful. I want to make it to the end, And so as I'm coming into leadership in this season where there is a lot of failure, there's a lot of publicized church leaders who are falling. I mean, what's on my mind is, how does this not my story? How do we do something different? And what I saw a lot of was just isolation that, I think especially for lead pastors, it's easy to not have close relationships because the people you're working with every day are all people who work for you in some sense. And so there's some distance there. Hopefully you have a strong elder team at your church. I mean, that I think is a huge thing for pastors to stay healthy, is that there's a strong team of elders. But I think it takes a lot of work on behalf of those elders to really get into relational closeness with a lead pastor, because the way eldership is working in a lot of churches, and it is here, they're all lay people. They have their own careers, their own lives. They're not in the church office every day, and so it takes concerted effort to build that kind of relationship where we can be open and vulnerable. And so that's what I'm hoping for my time here at Alderwood. I mean, we got a great team of elders. We just went away on a retreat in October, and I basically laid it out for them. I was like, guys, I mean, part of your job is to hold me accountable to my job performance stuff. Make sure I'm leading well, make sure I'm preaching well, and leading the team, and I need that. But that's not going to be what derails me from ministry. If I get derailed, it's going to be something with my family. To me, I'm not a good husband. I'm not a good father. Like I'm not the person that I say I'm on stage when I'm in private. And if you want to support me and protect me, you got to get into that. Mm-hmm. Like you got to know my family. You got to know my wife. You got to know my life, because that's the support that I'm going to need for the long term. And so I'm inviting those guys into that. And I hope that that's going to be something that, protects me, honestly. Mm-hmm. I mean, that, when there's struggles in life, when there's hard things, I mean, those are the kind of relationships that we need in the church. It's what we preach on stage, right? It's what we tell everybody in the congregation is you need community, you need a small group, you need, all that. Mm-hmm. And yet I think so often for lead pastors, it's just not there. Right. And I think we're seeing some of the consequences of that. So,
yeah, friendship is critical. Relationship. I mean, having people that you've been in relationship with, because obviously, they're in the position that you're in, and that I've been in. It's having that the trust that's there, right? To have those conversations, and it's really important, right? To be able to have that type of friendship where it's not about the metric.
Yeah.
It's not about the outcome, and because ultimately, that's, I think, where things get squirrely, right?
Yeah.
Because if all I'm doing is to follow the metric, to follow the outcome, then that's what I'm going to be focused on, and I'm going to do my darndest to achieve that. Versus what the big picture of this community is about.
Well, that's good. Tim, I appreciate you, man. I'm taking it longer than I said I would. Thanks for the time. It's been a good conversation.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us for this conversation with Tim Gaydos, and hope that you will continue to follow Native Exiles, to share it with a friend. The best thing you can do to support the show is just to tell somebody that you're enjoying listening to it and point them to us. You can follow us on YouTube or through any podcast app, and we cannot wait to be back again. We'll see you next time.